I wish I were in a position to go ahead and take my coat off and enjoy this, but I realize there's decorum in this church. Is that okay? Thank you. Has my name in it, so we'll get it along. Okay. That's normally the way I preach, or with a vest on so I can move around. We got some folks up here who can work up a sweat just standing up here and clapping their hands, and I'm somewhere between right now wanting to run away and throw up. That's honestly a feeling you get when you're trying to do what you don't necessarily want to do, but you know it needs to get out. We're moving through the book of Proverbs, not just because it's there, but because it's supposed to benefit us, allow us to gain wisdom to live, allow us to do more than recite nifty little sayings that sound good. Your pastor has elaborated on pride, the haughty spirit, and it is spoken of many, many times within Proverbs. And pride is up on one end of things. The other end of things is broken. In our schedule and whatever it says, broken heart, broken spirit. I have the privilege and the pain of dealing with broken today. And it's way, way, way too close to home. But I'm going there anyway. I'm going to feel like I'm taking my clothes off in front of you, and this would be something you'd only share in a small group. But you're my family, and I trust that I can say what I need to say, and you can hear it, and the Spirit can use it in your own life any way He wants to. My starting scripture today will be found in Luke 18, and I'd rather just read it to you. You don't have to run and try and pull it up in your apparatus or on the walls. And Jesus spoke this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes on all that I possess. And the tax collector, standing far off, would not so much as raise his eyes to heaven, but beat upon his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I just start with the word broken, because I've got a feeling nobody needs to go to the dictionary in Webster and find out what broken means to them. Now, we're not talking about broken bones or broken vases or broken cars. We're talking about broken on the inside. In Bible study this week, we elaborated on 2 of those situations. One where you're broken and you still have some ability to respond. And one where you are broken beyond that. Broken is where all the glue in the world can't put you back together. It's where the human heart has been crushed through rejection and loss. It will not or cannot heal. Something has happened. It may be repaired, but it can never return to its original condition. For those of you who want some extra words, I'll just say it's coming up short, it's lost or confused, wounded, can't meet the demands of the world, cannot keep up with the Joneses, is rejected or depressed, lonely, sorrowful, grieving, nowhere else to go, into the rope, your life is in pieces, and in deference to the fact that you're not the only one who's ever been there, suicidal. You might as well admit it. You despair that far. For a piece of pottery, it means shattered, but for a human spirit, it means crushed. If you'll put up our slide on the capitals there, please. I've gone to the 21st century, and I'm going to use some video, pictures. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, what is a picture in 1,000 words worth? Anyway, that's the best I could do on a home computer. For human beings, broken starts early in your life. I could take all kinds of stories. I could take Joseph out of Genesis. I could take Moses. I could take David growing up. I could take Samuel. I could take John the Baptist. I could take a lot of stories and pull the message out. I know those Bible stories well. But I know one story better than that, and that's mine. And I really hesitated to get this far into it, but it's the best way I know to describe what God has laid on me to share. If you'll pull up the two gentlemen at church. Now, it's not going to be easy for me to look at that because that nice young handsome man standing there on one side is my big brother. And he was voted most likely to succeed in high school. I'm the other little short, round, chunky kid next to that. I didn't get voted most likely to succeed. That's enough, please. Go ahead. Thank you. If you happen to be one of those who had that particular issue when you were growing up, children and your classmates can be kind of cruel. When it came to playing games or being involved in sports, I'd be the last one to be chosen if I was at all. Of course, the teachers tend to make you do that. So I'd be on one. It wasn't that I was very good in sports anyway, but I didn't have a popular following, and it got worse. I'll take it up through high school. I was part of the Spanish club as a sophomore, and one of their fundraiser activities, and please, I'm not trying to be insensitive about what this was. This was in the early 60s. This would not be done today. They would take the entire group of the Spanish class and auction them off to the entire school from the stage. Now, that basically turns out to be a popularity contest. Boyfriends buy girlfriends, girlfriends buy boyfriends. If you have enough money, you can buy a football player for one day, or you can get the services of a cheerleader in school for that day. When it came time for me to be literally auctioned off, literally, there were no bidders. Then somebody came up with the idea, let's sell him by the pound. So the librarian bought me for 3 or 4 cents a pound. The dynamics of what was going on in my life and in my family and everything else that was creating this environment, my drug of choice was food. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's ever had that problem or has that problem. By the time I was a sophomore in high school, I had a heart of stone. That's the best way I know how to put it. That protected me from all the hurt and pain that came regularly. The drawback was it also protected me from any joy or any good feelings. That system that your body has for self-defense does not discriminate whether it's good or bad. It locks it all out. So I was capable at that time of 4 things. I could eat, I could sleep, I went to school, and I worked. I had no life, and one might easily say there was no life within me. I was as broken as you can be on the inside. I wore my mask and went out and behaved. According to the books, I'm one who internalizes as opposed to some who are subject to outbursts and get in trouble that way. Eating is an acceptable vice. Acting out is not. So I got along. Now there are 4 ways, 3 of which belong in the world and 1 that doesn't, when you're in that condition. If you'll pull up the tree picture. Nope, that's not the one. The tree picture. The dog. You don't have that one? Okay, well, take that one off. Oh, darn. Anyway, the first and favorite of most people is denial. Somewhere I was in that world. My picture here was a dog that stuck actually literally in the middle of 2 trees. And many of us wear a mask well. We pretend well. We cover well. We have adapted well. We are camouflaged well. But we are basically living in denial. I'm not depressed. Everything's fine. You walk by me and ask how it's going. Hey, just wonderful, wonderful. When on the inside, you are a first-class, broken person. Denial is the first one. Now the one you put up, if you would, Luther. Yes. This is called, one of the other alternatives is to wallow in being broken. If you can read that, says the therapist, you need to let people in. And the patient's response, it's not locked. We want to hold on to what has happened in our life. We're not looking to change it. We don't see it as anything different. And if your heart and your emotions have been solidified to where they don't work for you, and your broken dominates your life, but you see no reason to want to change, you can just be stuck in that. Another choice for it is dealing with it. And counseling was mentioned recently over anger. He didn't split possibilities on counseling because in my study, there are 2 kinds of typically existing counselings. One is informal. That's amongst friends and people who know you. Some of the most valuable counseling goes on there. And then there's formal counseling where you go and pay somebody to hear what's going on in your life and ask you what and go back and start with your childhood. I've spent many, many hours in counseling and in the category of thousands of dollars as well. With my last counselor, who was a psychiatrist, And after several weeks, I said, well, what do you see is in the future? She said, well, from my standpoint, in 1 or 2 years and $15,000 or $20,000, we could fix you right up. That was my last session with her. Because before I left, I asked, then what are the people who don't have $15,000 or $20,000 going to do? And she smiled and said, well, they just won't get any help. That's not to disparage professional counseling. It can be helpful and useful. But if any of you have ever actually been out trying to find a counselor that worked for you, you'll know that it's not that easy to find someone who can help you. That takes me down to one of the possibilities that was not listed in our study book. I think there is a fourth possibility to deal with the brokenness. You might say the terms almost sound biblical. You can deal with it by confessing it. Confessing brokenness is not the same as confessing I stole a car, I cheated on my income tax, I stepped out on my spouse, or nothing. It's not a criminal or a nefarious action on your part that you're confessing. It is confessing that your soul is broken. That is such a simple thing to say, and such an incredibly difficult thing to do, because pride is always in your way. Until you finally get crushed, and then there's nothing left in your way. That actually could be the sermon, except there's not much. You can feel what I'm feeling. Okay. Let me pick up another scripture. Writings from Isaiah chapter 53. He was despised by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him. And in chapter 61, Isaiah's words, the Spirit of the Lord God is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and freedom to the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of our God's vengeance, to comfort all. There is the other side of brokenness that I want to bring up. This is according to the Greek gods, Janus, was that it? Two-faced, forward. This, Janus, okay. One is looking back, and that's where I've been. Now I want to go the other way. The other side of brokenness is where Jesus will lead you. And to the deacons and the pastor, Jesus made 2 mistakes in his ministry that we don't talk about much. You didn't... He entered into Jerusalem on a donkey instead of a big white stallion. Okay, that may not be quite so much. What if your pastor came in a beaten up old Volkswagen every day of the week? I know when I attended a Mennonite church in East Tennessee, I had an old truck. It ran. It wasn't rusty. But everybody else drove nice, new, big, fancy, shiny cars. And they came and said, "Did I have anything else to drive?" And I said, "No." "Well, if you don't mind, could you park it in the back?" Jesus came in on that donkey for a reason. Humility. And his other mistake, darn it, he went and died on an old rugged cross. Maybe we don't see that as a mistake, and of course we know theologically it was not. The old rugged cross was painful, embarrassing, unmentionable, ugly, despicable. I don't want to make you feel bad, but every time I look at that nice pretty thing up there, every time I see somebody wearing a nice little shiny silver cross around their neck, I think you don't get it. I appreciate a nice piece of jewelry. In my office is a crucifix. I don't know what happened to the Protestant church that we let the Catholic Church steal that away from us. The crucifix shows you that somebody went to a cross and died. We put up an empty cross. Please tell me when the cross was ever empty. Jesus introduced suffering and humility into the world. That's the crucial piece of Proverbs. It's reiterated in the first 9, 10, and shows up occasionally. If suffering and trouble are going to offend you and turn you away, if your need of knowledge, if your desire and your hunger for the Scriptures is not there, you're wasting your time. You can memorize everything in Proverbs from one end to the other, but if you're not open inside of yourself to get the idea of what it's trying to say, you can pick something else to read. Can we have the next slide? Hopefully we get this next one right. That one. Most Christians pray to be blessed. Few pray to be broken. Broken is when you become teachable. Broken is when you listen and don't argue. Broken is where God needs you to go in order to be useful to Him. We don't really want that. That's why Jesus became so offensive to so many. His teachings were popular as long as he was feeding them and giving them parables. And then when John says, he explained, no, it's going to be a life of sacrifice, the great divide. Well, I want to think about that a little while. That's not really on my agenda. And they left him. And then he went and died this awful death. It's hard for us to adjust, particularly in our nice, comfortable world. Suffering, when most of us would try and avoid it if we could, and the brokenness that comes with it. We have our last slide, Luther. I find from 2 Corinthians these words, and find the purpose in our broken, in our suffering, and in our hurt. This is not the Scriptures, I'll give you that. 2 Corinthians 1, starting around verse 4. Who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves have received from God. For just as the sufferings of Christ overflow to us, so also through Christ our comfort overflows. If we are afflicted, it is for your comfort and salvation. If we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which accomplishes in you patience and endurance of the same sufferings that we experienced. Jesus' ministry was one of greatness, including suffering. Ours will be too. If we find ourselves broken or suffering, there is the healer that we know. There is the great physician who can take any condition we are in and bring healing to it. Bear in mind, you do not ever return to the same thing you were. You return to something different, something new and different, something God begins to shape and use in His kingdom. And I guess that's what He calls us to, our willingness to be broken. There is one little caveat, one warning that goes with this. God is willing to heal your broken heart, but you have got to give Him all the pieces.